Hey, good afternoon. It is Monday afternoon. We're waiting on the 5 o'clock advisory on Hurricane Ian, and we're going to cover what we're looking at now, what we've seen throughout the day today, and then as soon as the advisory comes in, it will be on like that. I get it just about the same time as everybody gets it once it's sent out through the GTS at NOAA, and once we get it, we just put it right up. So hang tight. When the advisory comes out, you'll see the crawl start at the bottom of the screen with the highlights of the advisory, and we will have the latest forecast track, which of course includes the extent of the hurricane and tropical storm conditions that's expected. Something that I don't think you see just about anywhere else. I think I'm the only one doing that, and it's kind of strange that now a flood watch has been issued for South Florida. So we're going to have lots of alerts as we go through the afternoon here. In fact, I can show you that. So we'll just start with that, right? So here's the flood watch that's been issued there. It's flood watch, and it's in effect through Thursday morning. Flooding caused by excessive rainfall, and it's all of South Florida here. The expectation is the 2 to 4 inch range, they're saying here, but some rainfall amounts are for 4 to 6 inches with up to 10 inches. So there's our first advisory coming in for South Florida there in terms of the flood watch. We'll be seeing these little alerts coming in, and because this is live, when they come in, I'll be sure to share it with you. So let's talk about what's been going on today. Ian has been getting stronger. There's every indication that it is rapidly intensifying. And once again, definition of rapid intensification is 35 miles an hour increase in intensity over 24 hours or within 24 hours. So it seems like that is already underway, and that is going to continue to be the case. So there's the satellite loop, and you can see now bands are reaching up into South Florida. This first edge, this was this kind of explosion of thunderstorms that happened this morning. In fact, I think I might be able to go back. Maybe I won't be able to. Let me try to go back here about 6 hours on this loop here. Yeah, that's the problem with this loop, is that the loop kind of doesn't cover into South Florida. So let me just briefly change that so you can see what I'm talking about there. So the stuff that is over us now, that originated from Cuba right there, right here. It's this line of thunderstorms blew up this afternoon, and then has been racing to the north, as well as this enhancement here in the moisture that is now coming our way. So we've got more of these big bands here in Broward. I picked up nearly 2 inches, 1.9 inches in about an hour, and there was considerable amount of street flooding. Now this is one of the things we do because everybody is concerned, well, is it staying on the track at this point? Is it staying on the track? Because what's happening here as we go forward is things are starting to settle down in terms of uncertainty in the short term. There is still big uncertainty for Central Florida and the west coast of Florida, but here in South Florida, our model uncertainty opportunity or window there or range gets narrower and narrower as the storm gets closer and closer. There's just not a lot of possibilities that it's going to suddenly turn to the right, suddenly turn to the left. And so what we're going to start doing here is using different tools to track where it is at this point in time. So here is from the 11 a.m. advisory. Remember, the forecast advisories come out every 6 hours, unless there's a special advisory, 11 a.m., 5 p.m., 11 p.m., and 5 a.m. That updates the forecast track. Then we have intermediate advisories. They come out every 3 hours, and those would be at 2 p.m., 8 p.m., 2 a.m., and 8 a.m. Those update the position of the storm, what's going on with the storm, any additional watches or warnings. And then in special circumstances, when the storm is very close, we get 1 hourly updates when the radar can track the eye of the storm with the U.S. radars. Once that's trackable, then we get hourly updates on where the storm is, what the storm intensity is, and things like that. So just to give you kind of a feel of what's going to be unfolding here as we go through it. So this here is the 12-hour forecast position based on the 11 a.m. advisory. So the storm should be right about there at 8 p.m. this evening, and the forecast is for 105 mile an hour winds. So we're going to find out here at the 5 p.m. if we're getting close to the 105 mile an hour winds, and it looks like the center there is pretty much staying on the track. Now we're getting really, really granular here. We're kind of looking at very fine details, and as I said earlier, and you can see it looks like the center is maybe close to that where it's going to be at that 5 p.m. position, maybe a little bit slower. So that's what we're going to watch for now, is also the speed of the storm, because if it's going faster, it may have a tendency to reach this big trough we've been talking about a little bit earlier. If it's going slower, then it may miss the trough and slow down even more. The speed is going to be a huge consideration when we talk about rainfall amounts and rainfall potential. So I mentioned this earlier, and I want to kind of reiterate here. Basically, we're going to be looking for wobbles as it gets closer to the coast. A wobble is one of these where it's going along in a straight line, and then it kind of takes a little jog. And then it resumes the previous direction that it was going. And then it takes another jog. And then it resumes the previous direction it's going. Now, that creates this kind of this overall motion that is basically kind of at an angle there like that. That's something that we're going to be watching for. But the jogs really aren't so much a turn, because a turn is something that Charlie did back in 2004, where it literally turned to the right into Punta Gorda, and the forecast was for it to go into the Tampa Bay area. But as the storm gets closer to, it's a marine statement. So the little pings you hear in the background are little advisories coming up, and I'll be sure to share those with you. So as it gets closer to the Florida Peninsula, those wobbles are going to make a huge difference with the core of the storm potentially moving closer and closer to the coast. So that's one of the things we're going to be watching. Now, one of the things that's going to be a tremendous consideration, especially for the folks, and let me turn off the lightning here because there's been quite a bit of lightning. The folks in West and Central Florida who have been preparing, rain is on the way. That is going to mess up evacuation plans. It's going to slow down traffic, and it's also going to upset or disrupt any type of preparations you're doing. So this is a consideration now. You may have to dodge rain. That's going to slow down the overall preparations, but you really need to kind of get as much done this evening as you can before it gets dark, because we already have some rain coming into Central Florida there. This is Central Florida, the I-4 corridor there, as well as the central part of the turnpike that goes through into Polk County. Turnpike doesn't go into Polk County, into Osceola and Orange County. And then you can see in the Tampa Bay area already we've got some pretty heavy storms that have gone up. This is more of your typical summertime thunderstorm activity, but down here to the south, that is not your typical summertime thunderstorm activity. That is all being now influenced by the circulation from Ian, which is growing there. So let's talk about what's going on here with traffic, because that's going to be a big consideration as well. Of course, in South Florida, we always have traffic problems whenever it rains, and that's what's going on this afternoon. So those red areas, those indicate basically very slow traffic, bumper-to-bumper traffic, and I wouldn't say this is exceptional. This is what we see here in South Florida when we have traffic jams. Alligator Alley there, I-75, it's looking pretty good right now. We do have some slowdowns, which are fairly typical in Palm Beach County, going north to south, and we're getting some delays now going north here into Jupiter. Some of that is usually around that area in Palm Beach County. Let's check out the West Coast here, because that's really what we're going to be concerned about, is the West Coast. The West Coast is where we have the evacuation considerations. And so folks moving in from the West Coast there, we're starting to see some big tie-ups here over in Sarasota. Now, a lot of this if you drive 75 there around Sarasota, heading up through Bradenton and into the 275 interchange there, some of those delays are normal, but look at some of these secondary roads here through Bradenton, out of Palmetto, down towards Sarasota. There is increasing traffic. Now, whether it's normal or whether it's unusual because of evacuations that are occurring, it's got to be considered into your plan here. It is a slowdown in terms of getting away from the coast in the areas where there are mandatory evacuations. And one thing I can't stress enough here is that you don't have to evacuate very far from an evacuation zone. You just need to get out of the evacuation zone. You don't need to get out of the state or anything like that. Just get out of the zone. And basically, my feeling is at this point, if you're in Zone A, which is a mandatory evacuation zone, and Zone C doesn't have a mandatory evacuation zone, I would get out of all of the evacuation zones. So get out of A. If you're in A, get out of B and C as well. You want to just basically get out of all the evacuation zones. All right, that's the Sunshine Skyway Bridge there, and you can see what's going on there. There are now some pretty good delays going out of Pinellas County, southern parts of Pinellas County here, and into Manatee County. So delays are starting to build up now because, and we call it egress. This is modeled Traffic engineers study this to see, how long is it going to take to move a certain number of people out of an area. South Florida, we're not thinking in any way of evacuations, and once again, we're waiting on the advisory here, so I'm kind of tap dancing a little bit with what's going on. On up through Pinellas County there, you can see traffic is starting to build up there on the Howard Franklin. Some of that's normal, but that's also part of evacuations going here, and you can see the traffic in Tampa this afternoon. It is a mess as well as would be expected with people trying to get out, and along the I-4 corridor there, which is basically going to be kind of bumper to bumper. Remember, you don't need to go 60 miles an hour to get out. You just want to get out of the area. They're coming out of northern Pinellas County there into southern parts of Pasco there, north of Dunedin through Palm Harbor, Tarpon Springs. Roads are slowing down as well as over by Land O'Lakes, as well as I-75 now going to the north. There are some slowdowns, as well as 301. So lots and lots of traffic jams. And look at this, people leaving Orlando. I'm sorry, the I-4 corridor there going to Orlando is pretty jammed up. Sometimes that's not unusual. Some of these are regular traffic jams, but we can see I-75 going north there through Ocala as well as Gainesville. There are some traffic jams there. Let me zoom out here. We'll just kind of take a big overview. Some traffic around Jacksonville, lots of traffic on the I-4 corridor, not unusual there. Traffic on I-75 there into Sarasota, some of that's not unusual, and traffic in the big metro areas of South Florida. So all things that are going on once again as we wait on the new advisory. Let me just say at this point here, if you like the videos, if you think it's helpful, by all means subscribe. That helps me get the word out to more folks, get the notifications as well, and that will help more folks find out about it. And then of course click on the link and should share it to your friends as well, so they can find out as well this kind of detailed explanation. I'm going to keep doing these very frequent updates as we go forward here through time. So once again, there is all that rain coming up and pretty heavy at times. So let's talk about the steering currents here. We're about at least 6 minutes away from the new advisory. We've got the jet stream dip that we've been talking about, the blocking high. There is some dry air up here with this jet stream dip, so that is going to be an influence in terms of weakening the storm, but watch what happens here as we go forward into Tuesday morning. So right now the influence still is the blocking high to the east, so that's a northwest or northerly influence there. The jet stream dip, how far does it go? That would be a steering influence off to the east. Is it going to be enough to turn the storm to the east? It's hard to say. Here we are Wednesday morning now. Wednesday morning, and the jet stream dip is leaving. So now we're starting to see a situation where the turn may not be quite as quick. In fact, all of our steering currents are starting to weaken here. So that's something that we're really going to be concerned about, because a slowing hurricane, especially when it's near land, becomes an enormous flood producing hurricane, and that's certainly something that we don't want to see. There's Thursday morning as well, and then finally by Friday you can see we're kind of caught between the two highs here. So very, very light steering currents going to the north there. How do the models portray this? It's still one of these things here now where it is to the north, and then there is the European, which hasn't changed much. It shows that turn there occurring after Wednesday morning to the northeast. Of course, this would be very, very bad in terms of bringing the impacts to shore there. There is the 11 a.m. Hurricane Center forecast track. Here is the GFS ensemble. The GFS member kind of took a sharp right turn here earlier today, which was not something we want to see. Let me go back to the GFS there and stop it there because it kind of ran away. Those are the old watches and warnings there that popped up. So once again, here is the GFS ensemble, and that's the red member there. That's the run. If you look up on some of the computer model pages, that was the GFS, but this is the ensemble mean, which is a little bit to the west. There's been some discussion, well, which is more reliable, You kind of have to think of a combination of all of them. The GFS ensemble, this blue line here, it did pretty well last year, but all of the models have been flipping around. And let me go back to here because with what's going on in terms of the steering currents, because this is the real trick that the models are having to try to figure out. So the models, number one, they have to get how deep is that jet stream dip. How strong is it? how deep is it? Guess what? Our advisory is coming in, so let me set that up, and then we will go ahead and take a look at the advisory as it comes in. Okay, so here it is. In just a second here, we will get the public advisory. This is the forecast advisory, Category 2, winds of 100 miles an hour. Remember, the early forecast was by 8 p.m. this evening to have winds of 105 miles an hour. I don't see any reason to doubt that that's going to happen. The pressure, we talk about the pressure all the time. The pressure is an indication as it drops of the intensity and the damage potential from a hurricane. So the pressure is continuing to go down, and our motion here is now north-northwest. So before we were northwest, now we are north-northwest here. There's the public advisory. And there's your crawl right there at the bottom of the screen. So that is the new advisory in, and we've got the position here 155 miles southeast of the western tip of Cuba. All right, so let's take a look at it here and let it play out. Now, the one thing that I show here is my cone looks different from just about every other cone that I've seen because my cone shows the size of the storm, which I think is immensely important because most of us now are going to be out of the cone, but not out of the storm. And I'm talking basically the Keys, the lower Keys, as well as much of central and western Florida. Southeast Florida, I think we're still looking pretty good. We're going to find out that here in just a second. So that is 2 a.m. Tuesday. Forecast is for Category 3. And the yellow area, that's where the tropical storm winds extend well outside of the cone. In fact, now the hurricane conditions extend out of the cone. I think you'll hear repeatedly, hazards extend out of the cone. The cone basically, and I think I want to say this every time because we have new viewers joining us. The cone shows where the center point is expected to be. The cone is great at tracking a point. The cone is not great at tracking a big storm. And that's why the cone, I think, is sometimes misleading. Folks say, well, I'm not in the cone. It doesn't matter at this point if you're in the cone or not. It matters if you're in the hazards, the tropical storm conditions, the hurricane conditions, and all of the hazards that go with that, which we can't put them all on one map, unfortunately. It'd be too crowded, but there's the wind hazard, the rain hazard, the storm surge hazard, but we'll go over those as well. So here is our 2 p.m. advisory position here for, this is tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. You can see the tropical storm conditions approaching the Keys now. Our closest approach to the Keys, the winds are building across South Florida. The winds are really coming up in the Keys, and the forecast is for Category 4, so that intensification trend expected to continue. What about disruptions over the western part of Cuba there, Pinar del Rio? I think it's going to be minimal. Pinar del Rio, that's where they grow some of the best tobacco in the world, and it's very flat. So minimal disruption there in terms of intensification. Category 4 forecast for Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. So now here we are just after midnight here, Wednesday morning, and you can see the tropical storm conditions into the lower Keys and now reaching the southwest coast. So the wind now has picked up. When we think in terms of preps, and I'll show you the timeline there in a second, we want to have everything wrapped up. We don't want to be doing preps at dark. All right, let's go forward here to the next forecast point and see if I can slide it here just a little bit. There we go, so we can see it. So this is the Wednesday afternoon time frame here. So now the tropical storm conditions are throughout West Florida, spreading into Central Florida. See the cone? The cone is not quite to Tampa yet here. But guess what? Tampa is in the tropical storm conditions, and here come the hurricane conditions based on this advisory. So Sarasota now, it looks like into the hurricane conditions by Wednesday afternoon as well. Farther to the south, possibly Fort Myers as well, and coming into Tampa Bay here. So let's advance forward now and to our next forecast point, and let me move this along here so that we can keep track. There is Wednesday night. So forecast is for Category 3. This is a very bad night across west central Florida here. Hurricanes that they don't even have to come ashore, that impact you with hurricane conditions at night. It's terrifying. If you haven't been through one, everybody talks about the wind. I've been through many. The wind howls, you hear things breaking. It's very, very frightening. So in the hurricane warning area here, which we'll address in just a second, we want to get our shutters up and we want to get them up quickly. in the storm surge areas because we flee the water, we hide from the wind. We want to get out of the storm surge areas very quickly. There's 1 p.m., so now we have a very slow moving major hurricane here that is decreasing in intensity but likely spreading out as well. You can see the tropical storm conditions all the way across the peninsula there, all the way to the Space Coast. South Florida, once again, Miami-Dade, Broward. Palm Beach is on the edge here now, so the winds are going to be pretty strong based on this advisory in Palm Beach and up to the north from that. And we've got a correction here on the next advisory time, so that's not important to us there. Unfortunately, it's going to print another 10 pages of the advisory because they're getting really long with all the hazards here. In fact, let me just stop that because we don't need to have that going on in the background. So that's this is through the Thursday afternoon time frame, very slow, and we know from history that slow-moving hurricanes they're prolific rain producers and they are enormous flood hazards. So all of Central and South Florida and even into North Florida, this probably is going to be remembered as a huge flood event. But for the folks that go through the hurricane side of it, it's going to be a hurricane event, a destructive hurricane event. And for many of us as well, especially in Central Florida, West Florida, North Florida, it's going to be a power outage, trees down kind of event. This is probably going to be, if it verifies according to this track, and I very, very seldomly use these words, but if it follows this track, it's going to be a historic hurricane, unfortunately, for Florida. And then it's on to the north after that into Georgia, where it's expected to weaken with that dry air coming in. So let's talk about the latest watches and warnings. And let me grab the advisory here just so I make sure I don't miss anything, because there is a lot going on, right? So government of Cayman Islands has changed the hurricane warning. Let me make sure I've got my last advisory. That is an old advisory. I'm not going to read that. I'm going to read the newest advisory here, which, you know what, let me just make sure I've got it straight here from the Hurricane Center's mouth. So changes with this advisory. Hurricane warning has been issued for the dry Tortugas. So that is west of Key West there. That's that little blob that kind of stands out, and it hasn't updated. Sometimes the updates for the warnings are a little bit delayed. So that's a hurricane warning for the dry Tortugas. A storm surge warning has been issued for basically the west coast of Florida, including Tampa Bay. Storm surge watch has been issued basically on the east coast of Florida now. We'll talk about that in a second here, including St. Johns River. So that's up into Jacksonville area there, which during Irma had tremendous storm surge flooding, despite the fact that Irma crossed the western part of the state. The wind field as it crosses the peninsula here is going to impact the Atlantic and cause storm surge floodings there. And the storm surge watch has been upgraded to a storm surge warning for the south coast of Florida here, all the way down to Florida Bay. Hurricane watch has been issued for Bonita Beach to Inglewood, so that is on the west coast of Florida, and a hurricane watch from Inglewood to Anclote, so that's up it's upgraded into a hurricane warning for Tampa Bay. So hurricane warning now for Tampa Bay. Tropical storm watch has been issued for Swanee River, so that's on up the coast, and also on the east coast as well. So as these updates, we might have to update on the graphics here. We may have to go back and show you. So just to briefly summarize here on the watches and warnings, hurricane warning in effect for the western provinces of Cuba, not including Havana. Hurricane warnings for the west sections of Florida, including Tampa Bay, as well as the dry Tortugas. Storm surge warning in effect for the west sections of Tampa Bay, of Florida, including Tampa Bay. Tropical storm warning in effect for Cuban provinces of Havana. Tropical storm warning for the lower Florida Keys. Storm surge watch for Florida Keys, basically all the Florida Keys. I'll show you that in a second. And a hurricane watch for the west coast of Florida. Tropical storm watch for the middle Florida Keys, as well as Lake Okeechobee. So to summarize here, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, not under any watches except for a flood watch. So flooding, once again, going to be our big potential threat here. The watches and warnings are being upgraded for the west coast of Florida, and those will populate here as soon as that data comes out. We can see the storm surge warning there, the southwest coast, and it hasn't updated yet, but it should update here all the way up to Tampa Bay there, and it should extend. So while we're waiting for that to update here, let's move forward one graphic here to our timing graphic, because because timing's running out. Now I know everybody's still looking at the models saying, well, what are the models showing at this point? You know what, the models, it's kind of, we're getting to that point that I always talk about where everything is pretty much baked into the cake. There might be some wobbles which will impact local areas in significant ways, but the models are not going to be catching these wobbles here. And my fear is that because of the overall steering pattern in the atmosphere, these wobbles are going to be towards the right or towards Florida. I don't think we're going to see left wobbles here. The winds higher up in the atmosphere are going to start pushing from the southwest, and that's going to want to cause the storm to become lopsided, where the bad weather gets far on the right. So, and I can see the warning's updating now, that's good. As well as it gets lopsided here, it's going to want to wobble to the right. Once again, to reiterate, Charlie did not have a wobble to the right. It had a turn to the right. We're going to be watching for those wobbles to the right. You know what, let me take a sip of throat coat tea here, because yeah, I didn't realize that even not doing TV, I'd be talking so much. So 1 second, please. Okay, and the worst thing, of course, would be to choke right now, right? All right, so let's move forward into time here. So here are our time of arrival. Once again, the thinking here is that you want everything wrapped up before the tropical storm conditions arrive. Now, the caveat here is that the bad weather is going to be arriving ahead of the tropical storm conditions. And the key here with our timing graphic here is that local governments, they start to shut down their operations, they retreat, they wait and watch until the storm has passed before they start doing their recovery operations. So, and you can see our warning graphics are now updating, so good. So now we're talking about the latest watches and warnings there. It looks like to an extent. So, so we want to be well ahead timing here of preparations. So Keys, guess what? You want to wrap up this evening by sunset. You've got about 2 hours to get things wrapped up, the lower Keys, the middle Keys. There is now our closest approach is tomorrow afternoon here. You can see the tropical storm conditions moving into the lower Keys there and almost brushing the middle Keys. So this is why, and when you think about how the Hurricane Center puts up their watches and their warnings, they're looking at where those wind fields are forecast to go. They put the hurricane warnings up where the 36-hour threshold is met for hurricane conditions, the tropical storm warnings, where tropical storm conditions are expected within the 36-hour time frame, and then the tropical storm hurricane watches within the 48-hour time frame. So you can see here we're into Naples now, so the weather deteriorates. Let me back up here and we'll start here again. Sunrise tomorrow. Here we go through noon, so there's lunchtime. Here we go through tomorrow afternoon. So now the tropical storm conditions are arriving on the west coast, the southwest coast there, Naples. Weather deteriorates throughout the day. The weather's going to get bad here in southeast Florida as well. We're going to see bands. We're going to be on the nasty side of the storm here, the dirty side, and we're going to see rain band after rain band and prolific rainfall amounts because hurricanes are such proficient flood producers, rainfall producers. So here we go now into the Tuesday evening time frame here. So Tampa Bay should wrap things up if you're staying very quickly during the day tomorrow if you haven't done it today. That's the word of advice there, because the weather starts to deteriorate here. Fort Myers is tomorrow evening. The weather, the worst of the weather begins arriving tomorrow night. There's midnight, so Sarasota here. We're working our way up the coast here. There is 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Now the weather has deteriorated through the afternoon and evening in Tampa Bay and continues to deteriorate as we go into the evening. Once again, it's to the west now of Miami-Dade, Broward, and the Palm Beaches, but we are now seeing the worst of the winds here, which are strong winds, possible power outages, and a lot of rain with the possibility of tornadoes in addition to all of that. Here we go into sunrise on Wednesday. Now the weather continues to deteriorate in the Tampa Bay area. It's at its worst through all of South Florida. Basically from east to west, it's increasingly worse there. So it's bad on the East Coast, but it's even worse on the West Coast there. I'm thinking like Collier on up through Charlotte County, Lee counties as well. And then here we go into the Tampa Bay area with the tropical storm conditions now into central Florida. which is shutting things down, as well as up into the approaching the Big Bend area there, Levy County, also Cedar Key, and then moving on forward here. There we are into Wednesday night. And you can see here with a slow moving storm, this is a horrible, horrible situation for West Central Florida, Central Florida, South Florida, even North Florida. But a slower moving storm at night is really kind of the scenario that you hope never occurs. And if this plays out here, this forecast track plays out here, is unfortunately, it looks like it may unfold. Here we are Thursday morning, going on up into Thursday afternoon, and then there's Thursday evening. And you can see there the tropical storm wind field begins to shrink down. It expands over there into the northeast coast of Florida. That's why we have these tropical storm watches. That blue area, that's the tropical storm watches all the way up the coast there to Jacksonville. So let's let's regroup here, and let me take a breath here, because that's a lot of information for everyone, and kind of regroup and settle down here, and remind everybody that if you like what you're seeing, click like, subscribe by all means, as well as get the notification button there, because that kind of helps elevate what you think is good information, and then more people will see it hopefully, and then we will be able to get that information out. Let me quickly talk about the rainfall potential here, because I think that's going to be one of the biggest threats, and hopefully I'm on the right button here talking about the rainfall. We'll see. Yep. So this is rainfall forecast through Saturday. So this is the 5-day forecast here, and you can see they're forecasting now up to 20 inches just offshore of the west central Florida there. But if that drifts to the east, with the center coming to the east, that 20-inch forecast is not out of the question. So we're going to be watching this very closely. Note what they've got up in the northeast part of the state there. Basically Daytona up through Jacksonville, 10 to 15 inches of rain in the forecast there. Much of Florida, including South Florida, is in the 6 to 10 inch range there. They do have kind of a minimum, if you call it a minimum there, around Lake Okeechobee of 4 to 6 inches. All of this is evolving. All of this is shifting, even in the Tallahassee area there, 6 to 10 inches. So this really is a huge, huge Florida event here. Let's break it down and talk about some of your questions as we go forward here, because I know everybody has lots of questions here. And let's see. What do you think we should bring any light furniture in Miami? Yeah, you know what? I do see us getting wind, and here's the thing. It's not going to be tropical storm winds, and tropical storm winds are winds of greater than 40 miles an hour, that is just blowing 40 miles an hour, and then it gusts over that. So South Florida, I think especially Southeast Florida, yes, bring your furniture in. There's another one of our updates here. So that's what we call that's the TCV, that's the Tropical Local Watch Warning Statement. And so when we get tornado warnings going forward here and flash flood warnings, we're going to have a lot of them. We'll be trying to address those as well. So yeah, I bring in my furniture. I'm bringing in my furniture, and I'm in Broward, so Miami-Dade, Broward as well. Yes, bring in your furniture. And you guess from Fort Lauderdale Airport shut down flights Wednesday night. That's kind of an early call. They have their aviation criteria, their aviation minimum that they have to meet. They can't crosswind exceedance and things like that. The winds are going to be blowing out of the south, and blowing out of the south pretty hard. So that means, and Broward has east-west runways. MIA also has east-west runways. So there could be some disruption to travel there from the wind exceeding the crosswind thresholds there. So let's see what else here. Do you expect any wobbles in the center of the Gulf? There's a flood advisory now for Miami, and there is a update on the tropical storm watches and warnings for the Keys. Any wobbles in the center of the storm when it moves into the Gulf of Mexico? So once again, a little while ago, kind of back in the video, and I'll go back here and show you kind of what we think of when we think of wobbles. Let me put up the radar here, and because that's kind of actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll do the radar here. Actually, you know what? I think a better graphic. I know, right? So many things to pick from. What are you going to use to be the best, the most informative graphic here? Let me go back to this is going to be the forecast track. So here we are, and you can see I've got the National Hurricane Center's center point there. Let me get my telestrator back on here. So this is where they think it's going to go, right? Now the Florida West Coast kind of goes up in a line like that. And the storm is coming at an angle towards the coast. So the wobbles that we're going to be concerned about is, and a wobble once again is where it's going along and then it takes a little jog there. And then it's going along again and then it takes a little jog and then it's going along again. So while it's not technically a turn where the storm is literally as it's going, you can see it bending, the overall impact is basically effectively a turn. But these wobbles here are harder to predict and they have bigger impacts, especially if a wobble hits you. Now, my concern is that with this storm situation, we're going to have what we call wobbles right, which means the storm's going along and it wobbles right. The wobbles right are bad because they're toward the coast in this case. And I mean, we're dealing with a lot of hazards here. So, I mean, everybody's going to get something, unfortunately, here. And some people are going to get it much, much worse than others. The thing with a core of a hurricane is that you want to avoid the core because that's the destructive part of the hurricane. That's where we see significant damage to homes and buildings and significant power outages that take sometimes weeks for restoration because there's so much pressure on the infrastructure. So that's something we don't want to see happen here. Now you'll note the forecast there as it's approaching Tampa Bay is for Category 1. There's that consideration that there's going to be a lot of wind shear blowing on the storm, but what that's going to do, because it's going to be blowing from the southwest, let me illustrate that. So the wind shear is going to be blowing kind of like that on the storm. So what that's going to do is make the storm lopsided and put the worst of the weather across Florida. It's possible if we had land in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, it'd be windy, but it wouldn't be rainy at all. And what we're going to see evolve is that, first off, as the storm is coming along here, the satellite is going to show the eye that's going to be visible tomorrow start to cloud up. That means that wind shear is starting to blow on it. That's probably going to start happening. If it doesn't happen late tomorrow, it's more likely going to start happening on Wednesday, where the eye starts to kind of cloud in there. And then we'll start to see on the radar how the eye looks like it's getting crushed. It's still going to be a fierce, fierce storm, but as it's getting that shear on it and getting disrupted here, the wind field is going to start to spread out. So what we go from a very compact and nasty, very destructive core of a storm to a broader, still destructive, spreading out core of a hurricane where you kind of lose that center where the winds are in the Category 3, Category 4 range, and now you're spreading out to a broader Category 2. Look, much of Florida has not dealt with a Category 1 or a Category 2 storm in a very, very long time. We've had a lot of tree growth here. We've had a lot of people come in that haven't experienced a hurricane. And so the situation with an expanding Category 1 or Category 2, don't for a second think that, oh, it's only going to be Category 1 by the time it gets near my house. You are going to be surprised, I think, if it follows this track here about how bad a Category 1 in this situation is. And the rainfall, once again, I think here is it's kind of an insidious threat because it doesn't hit all at once, but it piles up very, very quickly. Let's see, what else do we think here? Are we expecting potential power outages in Broward? It's possible to tell. Decided to divide generator. Here's the thing about Broward, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach. I think we are going to see some power outages. It's hard to tell because they're not going to be as widespread. They're going to be more localized power outages where smaller utility lines are interrupted because of trees coming down. We always have the problem with I always say it's not a severe thunderstorm unless you have a ficus that blows over. That's kind of a South Florida thing because this ficus trees, they're big trees, but they're very shallow rooted, and when the wind blows hard, they blow over, and sometimes they clip power lines. Big, widespread power outages in Miami-Dade? No. In Broward? No. In Palm Beaches? I don't think so. As you go farther to the north, though, in Martin and St. Lucie counties, on up through Volusia, as well as Citrus County. No, not Citrus County. All right, now my map features are getting off, but you guys know what I mean. On up to the Space Coast, okay, by the Cape. So I think the power outage possibility is going to be a bit higher there, and buying a generator is not a bad idea. Here's my thing: if you're going to buy a generator, anywhere you buy it, buy a carbon monoxide detector too. You're paying what, $600, $800, $1,000, $2,000 for a generator. Carbon monoxide detectors are $20 to $50. It is the most beneficial thing, and it's the least expensive thing, a part of your power solution there. So do not forget to buy a carbon monoxide detector. We always learn from hurricanes. I think one of the things that we're going to learn from this is how bad the flooding can be and how unprepared some people are for a major hurricane event, which is going to be very, very unfortunate, because we've been talking about this for days. I always say during hurricane season, you don't ever want to be surprised by a hurricane. You don't want to say, well, I didn't expect it to come here. We've been talking about this possibility now for days. So nobody should be surprised now if it does end up coming into West Florida. And at this point, if it kind of weakens and slows down and just kind of lashes the coast there, we would say, thank goodness. We had to do a lot of work to get prepared, but thank goodness it wasn't that bad. What else was I saying about that here? Oh, the other thing, the lesson learned, is that there are unfortunately a huge loss of life after the storm has left. And that's one thing that is easily avoidable. Start thinking about that ahead of time. And as we get into here tomorrow, we're going to start talking about things like you're going to want to get your hard-soled boots out, shoes that can't be easily punctured across West Central Florida, where this thing could be making landfall. And you're going to want to put them nearby, because if there's a lot of debris, you're not going to want to have any injuries at all. My number one thing after a storm hits is be safe. Be safe, because you do not want to get injured while the infrastructure is really, really stressed after a storm. Carbon monoxide fatalities, they are very, very high after a storm. You know what the other one is? Heart attacks. Heart attacks, and guess what? And unfortunately, I fall into this category here. Men over 60. Yep, because we think, oh, we've got to clean all this up and stuff. And you know what? We're not as strong as we used to be. So those are those skew higher in fatalities. So everybody has got to be careful after the storm. Let's talk about what we're doing during the storm. What we're doing preparing for the storm. We're preparing our homes to withstand the storm. After the storm, that's when we are preparing for ourselves. So our supplies and stuff, that's for ourselves here. So I think basically a lot of underground power lines do well. Let's see, Largo, Safety Harbor, going to ride in the eye, I don't know. It's probably too early to tell. Let's see, potential outages in Broward, I talked about that. Julio, like a staircase where those wobbles create kind of that effect of the staircase there. So certainly things we're going to be watching here going forward. Sleep is important, right? Yeah. You know what? Speaking of sleep, I was thinking back. I lost, and I tell this story when I talk about my hurricane experience with Irma. I lost 9 pounds in 7 days, and I thought it was from the stress. I realized now what it was. I just didn't have time to eat. I was so busy preparing graphics, studying, learning about the storm, things like that, that I didn't have time to eat. And so this is the case once again. I don't have time to eat. So once again, let's talk about if you like the video, please by all means click the like button, subscribe, and get the notifications there. And I will bring you an update here tonight at about 10:40. That's, I think, what we're going to do the next one, so we can catch the 11 o'clock advisory. Thanks, everyone. Listen, stay safe, stay prepared, and follow the local emergency managers' advices in the counties on evacuations, as the cities as well. If you're in an evacuation zone, it's because of the water threat, the storm surge threat. If you're in the hurricane warning area, it's because of the wind threat, and that's a shutter situation, just to reiterate there. So stay safe, and of course, we'll be back here tonight at 10:40.